Hello again. I'm afraid most of this was already said earlier, so I'll zip through it. So why do the procedures fail? Still the same way of thinking. Usually, when a patient comes to you after failed robotic bypass, it's dietary problems. However, when we look at the eating pattern, there's two possibilities. I mentioned the first one in the sleeve talk, which is a hyperphagia. Here we're talking about polyphagia, which is grazing, basically. Now, we know that counseling does help. There's literature on that. But I was asked to talk about the length of the common limb. We have to refer to the first paper in the laparoscopic here, which is Brolin, who was already also mentioned earlier today. Common channel of 75 to 100 centimeters in 47 patients, excess weight loss of about 50%. Now, what happens in the Brolin technique? This is the schematic of any raw wire construction. Pink, you have the alimentary. B, in green, you have the biliary. And in yellow, you have the common limb. The idea, of course, when you distalize, is to cut where it's indicated by the arrow, and then you just move down the biliary limb. And actually, what you do is you lengthen the alimentary and you shorten the common limb. The idea was described by Scopinaro. By doing this, you have a reduction of the absorbed energy, and actually, when you look at it, it's 27% only of the fat is absorbed versus about 100% of sugars and 60% of total protein. Now, this is the Brolin construction, and you see there's a lot of authors that addressed this issue, and we see that the weight loss outcomes, you see at the bottom, is not so good. However, there's very little risk of protein malnutrition. The other technique is the Sugarman technique. Here we have a long biliary limb and a short common channel. It was described already back in 1997. And this is the initial paper. And you see that, unfortunately, with this technique, we have a very high perioperative mortality and a very high incidence of having to go back in and deconstruct the distal bypass. And you see that in patients with a 50 centimeter common limb, we have 13 out of 23 patients needed a conversion. In the ones with the longer common limb, we have 8 out of 25. But still, the number of revisions is unacceptable. And we see that in other publications as well. There's Rollins and Phoebe, 2011 and 2001. And we see that the long-term complications, to the right of your screen, we see that there's an unacceptable high incidence of complications. This is more papers on the same subject, and you see that they all agree on the fact that the risk of significant protein malnutrition is really an issue. Now, we published on that back in 2011, and in the beginning we were very happy with an alimentary limb of 150 and a common of 150, so we just transected the alimentary and brought it down on the common channel like this. And unlike the Brolin technique, we will transect at the bottom of the alimentary limb and bring that down on the common limb. So we have an alimentary of 100 and a common of 150 and a very long biliary limb. Now the problem, and this is unfortunately unpublished, but these are our real life outcomes. You see that in total we had 28 patients. Indication was weight regain. But some was recurrent type 2 diabetes and others combination of type 2 diabetes and weight regain. And you see that what happens is that in 30-day complication, we see that we have 7% leaks. And in total, with trocar hernias, abscesses, obstructions, etc., you see that we have 39% complications, which is, of course, unacceptable. Moreover, when we look at the follow-up, and we see that we have a follow-up that's with a mean of 10 years, we see that despite the fact that we had a remission rate of 100%, which is great, We also see that we have very good outcomes in terms of weight, but we also see that we have 11 patients out of the 28 that had diarrhea and emaciation that needed to be either reproximalized or to undergo feeding gastrostomy. We had 2 patients that developed hypoglycemic syndrome and 8 patients that had significant nutritional deficiencies. So here we see that we have, again, 9 patients, which is 32%, requiring surgery, and in total 75% of patients with significant complications. So it takes not much explanation that it is really not a good procedure. So we abandoned that. So therefore, when we look at our redo algorithm, you can just forget about the distal gastric bypass part here. So this is to forget about, even for patients who do have grazing syndrome. And actually what we can do is what we just heard, we can add a ring, which is adjustable or non-adjustable, or if that doesn't work, we can still restore the anatomy, transform and sleep, complement to DS in 2 or 3 stages. But like Dr. Weiner says, this is a lot of work for very little. Thank you very much.